Solving climate change would be the most amazing thing humanity has ever done. That's according to Microsoft founder Bill Gates, speaking in an interview with the BBC, where he also reveals that the challenge is very, very easy in comparison to ending the COVID-19 pandemic. From an investing and personal finance perspective, getting to net zero over the coming decades is one of the most significant factors behind all future investing decisions. This Bill Gates interview is enlightening, to say the least. So I want to take a look at some of the key messages and think about what it means for our money. Gates is talking an awful lot about solving climate change right now due to his new book. It's called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. He told Justin Rolat, who is chief environmental correspondent at the BBC, not to underestimate the scale of the challenge, saying we've never made a transition like we're talking about doing in the next 30 years. There is no precedent for this. The challenge, in a nutshell, is how to get from 51 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. That's what us humans are currently pumping into the atmosphere typically each and every year. How to get that level down to zero, or at least down to net zero, because this challenge isn't about stopping greenhouse gas emissions altogether, but rather about reducing them and then offsetting the rest to mitigate the damage being caused. Net zero, as explained in this article, is all about balancing carbon emissions by absorbing an equivalent amount from the atmosphere. For example, we can plant more trees as these soak up CO2. Unsurprisingly, Bill Gates has a focus on the use of technology to get us there, to get us to net zero. He talks in this interview about how renewable energy sources, things like wind power or solar power, these can help us reduce the amount of carbon emissions from electricity generation. However, as things stand, these sources of electricity represent less than a third of total greenhouse gas emissions. So while it's a start, it's not going to deal with the entire problem. The much bigger issue is the other 70%, how we generate carbon at the moment through the production of things like steel and cement, and also through transport systems, fertilizer, etc. And as things stand, there doesn't appear to be technological solutions for decarbonising those industrial sectors. So in his interview, Bill Gates is calling for massive levels of innovation. This is innovation on a scale the world has never seen before, and he thinks that governments need to lead that innovation effort. The reason that change has to start with governments is because the current economic system fails to place a real price on the use of fossil fuels. It's too free and too easy to generate carbon, to generate greenhouse gas emissions in our day-to-day activities without us paying any real tangible price for it. For example, when you fill up your car with petrol or diesel, or you switch on your central heating in your home and you're causing pollution to the planet, there's no real cost, there's no direct link between the damage caused to the planet and any sort of financial pain that you feel for yourself. And that's why Bill Gates believes that government intervention is the right approach here. He said in his interview, we need to have price signals to tell the private sector that we want green products. I guess this is a carrot and stick approach. You offer incentives to businesses to produce and to innovate when it comes to green and sustainable products, but the stick is taxation. And you have to charge businesses, you have to charge industry for polluting, you have to charge them to a much larger extent than we have done today. Ultimately, of course, these costs, these taxes are paid for by consumers. So if we choose to drive an internal combustion engine car, or we choose to go overseas on holiday and jump into a jumbo jet, then we should be paying the price for that environmental damage. Another reason why Bill Gates is pushing for this government intervention is the need for a combined approach. All governments will need to pull in the same direction. He says in his interview that it would be impossible to avoid a climate disaster, especially for people living near the equator, unless governments around the world get behind this effort. It needs to be a constant effort. It can't just be a one-off thing. He refers to it in the interview as a constant 30-year push and says businesses just can't change all that physical infrastructure unless the market signals are constant and very clear. We then move on to what I think is one of the most interesting parts of the interview, and this is clearly aligned with our investment philosophy and informed choice. Gates says that consuming less stuff, so flying overseas less frequently, buying food locally, using less electricity and gas, those steps alone, those steps that we can all take as individuals, won't solve the problem. He gives an example of India in this interview, and he says India is going to build housing for their people, provide lighting at night, air conditioning to make conditions livable. What he's saying there is that as the global population continues to require all of the mod cons associated with a comfortable life, we're not going to see any reduction in global demand for energy production. So this has to happen at a much higher level. It's great that we all do stuff on a day-to-day basis that reduces our carbon footprint, but we're not going to tackle the real problem unless we tackle the real problem. He says in the interview, if you buy an electric car, a hamburger made out of a meat substitute, an electric heat pump for your home, you're helping increase the production of these products and therefore helping drive prices down. And that to me is key in this process. The more people make a conscious decision to switch to using sustainable forms of energy and products and services which have a more beneficial footprint for this planet, the lower the price of those products and services will become, the more affordable they'll become, and the more accessible they'll become, and then they'll be adopted on a more widespread basis. But what I believe is this is really about how we allocate our money, our investments, our pension pots to a much greater extent than how we live our lives on a day-to-day basis. I say that as somebody who attempts to live my life with the smallest possible carbon footprint. I drive an electric vehicle, we heat and light our home using renewable energy sources, we consciously choose not to travel overseas on airlines. And all of this makes a positive difference, but it's minuscule by way of comparison to the positive impact that we can make when it comes to investing in our portfolios, investing in our pension pots. That's something, we're really helping our clients in Informed Choice to take more control over, to make that positive impact with their money as well as with their lifestyles, because the positive impact with their money is so much more significant than walking instead of driving or switching to a vegetarian diet. The BBC interview addresses this issue of Bill Gates and his billionaire lifestyle. Is there a degree of hypocrisy in some of the messages that Gates is sharing here when he still flies around the world by private jet? His justification for using private jets is that he's paying over and above the usual cost of travel to pay for biofuels. These are aviation fuels made from plant products. And he estimates he spends as much as 3 times as much money for his aviation fuel as he would otherwise have to do. He's also offsetting, so he's using biofuels, he's offsetting the cost of that private jet travel. And on this notion of getting rid of flying, because clearly if we were to just abolish aviation, it would have a significant impact, significant reduction on carbon emissions. He says that type of brute force technique won't get us there. Instead, this comes back to the need for a technology solution. He says the answer has to be a type of aviation fuel that doesn't cost much extra and is zero emission, and that's got to be biofuels or electric fuels or perhaps using green hydrogen to power the plane. So again, innovation when it comes to technology could well be the answer to this challenge. He addresses becoming a target for coronavirus conspiracy theorists, and I'm sure we've all seen this nonsense spouted online about Bill Gates. We joked with my parents last weekend when they got their COVID vaccines that we can now use our phones to track them wherever they are. And my dad was saying, just for fun, that he had a sudden urge to go out and buy Microsoft products. It's all utter nonsense, of course. It comes from complete nutcases who feel that the global elites are somehow in control and that Bill Gates is leading those global elites with some bizarre strategy to reduce the world's population. Apparently, Bill Gates laughed in response to that accusation. He said, "Why would I want to track people? I'm just not that interested in where people are going." It's worth noting that Bill Gates is a very wealthy man. He's the 4th richest person on the planet. He's got a net worth of approximately $124 billion. It's also important to note that he's given away an awful lot of his money, nearly $50 billion through the Gates Charitable Foundation that he and his wife Melinda set up back in 1994. And the focus of his philanthropic endeavours include global health and development, education, and now, of course, tackling climate change. And he says in the interview that he was concerned that talking about climate change may attract similar levels of controversy to his talk about the eradication of tuberculosis and malaria. Whatever he talks about is going to attract the conspiracy theory nutcases. There's just no escaping that. He said in the interview, "I don't want to dilute my voice on issues like polio eradication or malaria." However, he felt the time was right now to publish this plan of his for tackling climate change. And timing-wise, that's because there's a big climate conference in November coming up later this year, being hosted by the UK, taking place in Glasgow. He wants his ideas to be fed into the green stimulus packages that are being proposed around the world by various governments, trying to build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. And he concludes the interview by saying that it's not going to be easy to tackle climate change, and it has to continue to be a huge priority for the world each and every year. But the hope is, apparently, according to Gates, that we get a bit lucky and innovation around new technologies that solve the really tough conundrums about climate change are discovered, they're stumbled upon. He's optimistic that we can still, as a planet, avoid the very worst effects of climate change. He finished the interview by saying, "You know, I've seen many times innovation surprises us in a positive way." So 3 key lessons for me coming out of that interview between Bill Gates and the BBC. One is just how important it is for governments to lead with this effort. This carrot and stick approach, incentivizing industry, incentivizing businesses to make positive impact decisions, and then penalizing them for making negative impact decisions too. And as I said, undoubtedly that will filter down as a cost and also hopefully as a benefit when it comes to our day-to-day decision making, the cars we drive, the ways we heat our homes, the international travel we decide to do once we're allowed to do that again. Number 2 is the understanding that the day-to-day decisions we make about our lifestyles are important and they can have a positive impact or at least reduce our negative impacts. But actually this is a bigger challenge than that. And a big part of that solution is going to come from how we allocate our money. We're already seeing a huge reallocation of capital away from carbon intensive businesses across to positive impact sectors and businesses. The way in which we consciously decide to allocate our investment and pension portfolios here has so much more of a dramatic impact than the way we live our lives on a day-to-day basis. And thirdly, I found it fascinating that he was prepared to address head-on the reality of being associated with these conspiracy theorists. The journalist in this interview talks about Bill Gates becoming something of a bogeyman for coronavirus conspiracy theorists. Right-minded people know that it's absolute nonsense what these conspiracy theorists come out with, but it's a distraction from the real issues, from this really important stuff. And like it or not, we need people like Bill Gates. We need futurists and technologists. We need incredibly wealthy people. We need philanthropists. We need people like Gates to raise the level of this debate, to feed ideas into the system. And then we need governments to take action and to lead on this to make positive changes for our future. What did you make of this interview on the BBC with Bill Gates? I'll put a link to it in the description below. I found it fascinating. I passionately believe that the future is all about environmental, social and corporate governance, or ESG investing. We've got a big role to play as investment advisors, but also as investors, all of us, to drive positive change in this space. And it's going to be a fascinating, albeit potentially quite scary, few decades ahead as we start to realise and see on our daily lives the very real dangers and risks associated with climate change. And we keep our fingers crossed that we do stumble upon and get a bit lucky when it comes to finding these new technologies, stuff that solves some of the biggest problems which are currently insurmountable. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd absolutely love to hear from you on this one. Thank you for watching this video. Until next time, I'm Martin Bamford, and remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.